Welcome to the Reality Transformation Gathering, bridging ancient wisdom and modern science to change the world together. This gathering will be a 5-day expansive exploration of the recent breakthrough discoveries in the sciences and quantum theory, psychedelic research, near-death experience studies, as well as profound, time-tested ancient wisdom from shamanic traditions, indigenous cosmologies, and knowledge from far ancient cultures around the world. I am Katie Lou Sanborn, your host and guide to the Reality Transformation Gathering, and today I am very delighted to present José Luis Stevens. And before we get start our conversation, I will also read José's bio just to share with you his incredible background. José Luis Stevens, PhD, is an internationally recognized lecturer, teacher, and consultant specializing in personality and the applications of indigenous wisdom to business and life. A psychologist, clinical social worker, and author of 21 published books and self-published ebooks, as well as numerous articles, he is the co-founder of the Power Path School of Shamanism and the Center for Shamanic Education and Exchange. Jose completed a 10-year apprenticeship with the Wisharika shaman Maracame, and for the last 25 years has studied extensively with the Shipibo of the Amazon, the Kera of the Andes, and continues his training with the Wisharika, which is a Toltec tribe in Mexico. His most recent books, published by Hierophant, are How to Pray the Shaman's Way and The Shaman's Book of Extraordinary Practices. Jose has a doctorate in integral counseling from the California Institute of Integral Studies, an MSW from the University of California, Berkeley, Master of Social Work, and a BA in Sociology from the University of Santa Clara, California. He lives and has his base of operations in Santa Fe with his wife and task companion, Lena. Welcome, Jose. It's really good to have you here. Welcome, Jose. It is such a delight to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited.
Yeah. So you have this most amazing background of coming from the more traditional, Western training and then discovering all these other amazing people and these amazing cosmologies and these different human experiences and capacities. And you had the courage to just keep following that. And you've done that for a long time with, different types of, shall we call them tribes or nations, cultures, right? And
Mhm.
that has given you a very unique opportunity and actually also your innate capacity to kind of translate, explain, integrate, and bring together for the benefit of those of us who haven't had those experiences to understand a particular worldview, a way of seeing, who are we as people and how do we belong and all of that. And so I'm super interested in hearing a little bit more about what do you think about, in the light of what you have learned and in the light of those cosmologies and your own decades of teaching and journeying and learning, what is a human being? And what is their source of light and life as we're talking about becoming luminous and embodying light and kind of the actual possibility of that? Because we don't talk about it in the Western tradition, like embodying light, becoming luminous, source of life and light.
Yeah, that's true. And the way I like to think of it is that there's different ways of answering the question, what is a human being, depending on what level we're dealing with. Okay, so you're going to the heart of things. You're going to the deepest level with that question. I know it. And because we could talk about, what the purpose of a human life is, and in various ways. So, for example, we could say, well, the purpose of being human is to learn, to learn lessons, and ultimately, those lessons result in learning that we're not really separate. That we're actually all we were always connected from the beginning, and we still are. And so it's been a kind of a game, if you will, like almost like a video game. in which we're playing hide and seek with spirit. And there's a story I like to tell that's longer, so I won't go into it. But it's basically the story of how we as little creations of spirit um, decided to go off and play hide and seek with the Great Spirit. And so we've done a very, very successful job of it. And we've gotten lost, completely have amnesia, and really do think that we're off running our own lives in some other universe somewhere, and there's no connection with spirit anymore. But what we ultimately realize is that the whole thing was just a game because it's impossible. It's actually impossible to think that you're not connected to spirit. I mean, you can go for lifetimes believing that, but eventually you're going to come around to the fact that we are connected to spirit and we're all connected to each other, and there's only one thing. And therefore, this game was just sort of entertainment. So, being a human being is about, on the one hand, it's kind of like going to school and learning, but it's also a game. And games like movies can seem really real when you're watching them. You can get so engrossed in a movie that you're actually having physiological responses and you're thinking, oh my God, they're all is lost. The hero and the heroine, they're going off the cliff. And then at the last minute, they're saved. And then you feel really relieved. And everybody goes out feeling good. And that's kind of how this is, this experience of being human is. It actually is not unlike a Hollywood movie that actually does have a good ending. But I'm getting ahead of myself there. So there's different ways of looking at this experience. But one, the way I like to see this is along the lines of the Toltec philosophies in Mexico, central Mexico. That's where the Toltecs are from. And they see us as luminous beings. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I'll go through a kind of explanation that leads us there. We know if we look at the sun that the sun is self-luminous. The sun doesn't rely on anything else to shine on it. It is the shining object in the sky, and it sheds light in 360 degrees on all the planets, all the moons, all on the earth, on all the plants and animals, and you know, and everything is reflecting the light of that sun. Now, the sun, in some ways, the sun it doesn't matter to the sun that the light is reflected. It just likes to shine. And in so doing, everything is benefited. And, everything reflects its light. However, the notion is that in the universe, this is a Toltec notion, in the universe, there's concentrations of consciousness. That everything is consciousness, everywhere, eternally and infinite. But within that context, there's concentrations of it. And that certain things are concentrations of it, and those are the things that are self-luminous. So the sun is a concentration of consciousness, so much so that it's luminous and it radiates to all around it, raising the consciousness of everything. Okay. However, what they noticed was that there are other things that are self-luminous. Not very many, but there's other things. And that would include human beings. And we're only talking about our tiny little corner of the universe now. Human beings, dolphins, and whales, and the sun. Those are the four groups that are self-luminous. So, yeah, dolphins and whales are the luminous ones of the ocean. We're the luminous ones of the land. So, we, of course, being animals, receive the light of the sun and we reflect that. But we also have a source of light within us that doesn't come from the sun, that actually comes from within, and it's coming through our heart. So the heart is the vehicle for light that is moving through us and out. Now, where does it come from? That gets hard to talk about. I mean, the easiest way to say it is that it comes directly from spirit, but that means so many things for so many different people, you know, God, Yahweh, Allah, you know, and so on. So many ways of talking about that. But it's the creator spirit. It's the source of all, of everything, is the source of our light. And it's actually coming through us so that uh, so that we human beings are actually carriers of light, or you could say vehicles of light. And that's what I meant by saying that we're going to the deepest level here, because that's what we actually are. Concentrations of consciousness, where the consciousness is so concentrated that we actually are vehicles for light, and we're responsible for carrying that light to whatever's around us. And so it's almost like we're pollinators, like bees or anything that pollinates, hummingbirds or moths, things like that, that we bring light wherever we go. Now, here's the deal. The sun knows that it's a light carrier. I mean, according to the Toltecs, okay, the sun knows it, and it's full on. It doesn't hold back. But as we know, human beings are all over the map about this. We're ambivalent. We don't believe it. We don't think that that could be true. Blah blah blah. And so, if we don't acknowledge it and we don't get behind it fully, then the light that comes through us is dim. It's like turning down the dimmer switch, or another way of putting it, it's like when you have a campfire, you're camping and you have a nice campfire, and it's a flame, and then you go to sleep, and in the morning it's just ashes. But if you dig in the ashes, there's embers, and you could start a whole nother fire if you added leaves and twigs, and it would spring to life. Okay. So most human beings are like those embers in the morning. It's covered up. You don't see much. Doesn't look like there's anything there. But if you stir in there, you find there's an ember, and the fire could start again. So the light could radiate out. But it has to be, you have to restart the fire. You have to add some twigs, and I mean, that's an analogy, but it works. So most human beings don't know that they are a source of light. They forgot that in this game of hide and seek. And so they have amnesia about, they don't, it's not conscious to them that they're light carriers. So as a result, most people are not shining very brightly. But that doesn't mean they can't. There's not a human being, a human being would not even be alive if they didn't have at least an ember. So every human being on the planet, no matter what their state or status or belief or how they're behaving, they could be an arch criminal, whatever, they have an ember. And it can be called forth.
Mhm.
So how is it called forth? Well, it's called forth by somebody whose light is shining. Okay, so because when the sun shines on objects, the objects reflect that light. So, it shines on the ocean reflects back the light of the sun in a million trillion ways, you know, through little sparkles of light that come off every little ripple and a wave. So, uh, at any time, the ember could spark to life if it's stimulated by light of similar kind shining on it. So there's something we could call alignment or harmony or resonance. Those are good words to describe this. It just takes a reminder.
Mhm.
Now, however, we should also realize that some people are not ready, and maybe they won't be ready in this life. Um, some people are very ready. They're just waiting. Any light will spark their light. For other people, it may just remind them at a very deep level, but they're not ready. And that's perfectly okay because it takes a certain amount of sophistication and a certain amount of maturity to really shine. Okay. Now, a person can have fame and fortune. They can be very popular. They can be a rock star, you know, but that's very surface. We all know that there's people that are like rock stars that if you scratch the surface, there's darkness and there's not very a lot of brightness there, really. It's dark. They have an ember, but it's not lit. And we all know people that are not famous at all and not well known that shine brightly. Maybe a monk in some monastery somewhere, or it could be somebody that's well known too. So, so that's a little what should I call it? Uh, it just explains the fact that not everybody's ready,
Yeah.
and and we all come to readiness at different times, but eventually everyone everyone's embers will burst into flame, and everybody will be full on like the sun. End of game.
Mhm.
Well, it's not the end of everything, but it's the end of this.
End of this game.
Yeah.
I'm I'm curious. So for those who are ready, and other than coming across that light from wherever they get it from other beings with light or whatever else, like are there any tools or actions or kind of something practical? How can they think about it in our practical world? And how do you think about it? How do the Toltecs think about it? Like help us kind of sort that a little.
Well, the Toltecs were experts at uh, thinking of processes and practices that would um, help people to midwife people to we call it these days waking up. That that word is fraught now with political connotations, but it is a kind of waking up. But you could just say it's also a brightening up or
Yeah.
coming into the light or whatever. They were very, very knowledgeable about this. And they have um, I should say maybe a little bit more about the Toltecs here, just if people are not knowing who they are.
Yeah.
The Toltecs is a tradition in central Mexico that is very parallel to the Mayans of Guatemala, Belize, Yucatan. They're almost the same, but one is more south and one is more north. That's all. So the Toltecs and the Mayans shared the same calendar. They knew the same things. They were very advanced astronomers. They had extremely advanced mathematics. They understood the universe in terms of mathematics. They knew cycles. they knew things that our astronomers have only recently just discovered. They knew, for example, that our solar system orbits around the Pleiades and that we're a satellite of the Pleiades as we are also rotating around our galaxy and not only going around our galaxy, but going up and down. They knew all that stuff, and that's pretty sophisticated understanding of how the galaxies work.
Wow.
How did they know that? They had no telescopes. They just watched the stars and they watched the cycles. And so out of these cycles, they were able to develop prophecies. And the prophecies of the Mayans and the prophecies of the Toltecs are almost identical, except that they got off by 8 years, which is
Interesting.
nothing in the billions of years, but the Mayans thought that the critical time of awakening was 2012, and the Toltec said, no, it's 2020, which are both past us now. So, in other words, according to their prophecies, the time is right for a massive paradigm shift, a massive shift in consciousness where all of humanity rises to a higher octave, which means knowing who they are and knowing what they're about, more or less. They're saying that it's going to be about a 50-year process of this process of change and shifting. But for them, that's a blink of an eye. For us, it could be our whole lives. But we're well into the shift now, and it involves this process that we've been talking about, which is like uh, people every day now, by the thousands around the world, by the hundreds of thousands, recognizing that they're luminous
Yeah.
and they can begin to shine. And as they shine on everything else. And that's a resonance that raises, it's like it wakes up everything around them. And then that in turn wakes up, it's like a domino effect, and it can be very rapid. So they're saying about 50 years, but pretty quick. So we're engaged in this monster process right now. And what they didn't use this analogy, but they more or less talk about it, which is that if you're going to make a change like this, uh, you have to clean up the mess because we've made a pretty big mess in the last few thousand years, and it's not unlike you decide to clean your garage. Now, maybe you haven't cleaned your garage in 20 years, and so you keep throwing things in there, but then you shut the door and turn the light out. And then one day you say, I've got to get to it. The time is now. So, what is the first thing that you do when you go to the garage? Well,
Turn the light on.
you open the door and you turn the light on, and it's not pretty. It's horrifying. That's exactly what we are going through right now. We are looking with horror at who we have been. And by appearances, it looks like, well, it's those folks out there that are making a mess. Now, no, this is the result of how we have behaved, and who we really are. And we have to look at it before we have to turn the light on before we can clean the garage. It's necessary. You can't do it in the dark. So light is important. We clean up the mess, and then, you know, we're ready to go. So this will take us 50 years at least. And
Feels like we're in that process now, certainly.
absolutely.
This
And so
week, last week, this year, last year.
I understand that a lot of people are really in despair and really in uh, really depressed and angry, and it's understandable. But first of all, that doesn't help. Second of all, you have to take the long view. This is very, very temporary. Yeah, it's awful, but it's temporary. This too shall pass, and it'll pass sooner than we think. But it's not going to be 6 months either. So we have to be somewhat patient. And we have to understand that it's a required course. There's no way to avoid it. We got to clean the garage. And then um, we can enjoy the fruits of our labor, which are coming. So I'm very hopeful. I don't worry about that this is the end.
Help us see a little bit. What do you what do you kind of imagine if? What do you see as possible? What do you see as possible both in the process and after the process? Something that we're not even seeing that would make us maybe filled with hope, more like with you, and filled with light, more like the Toltecs speak.
Okay, great question. And yeah, there are things like within 50 years, um, war as we have known it will be absolutely unthinkable.
Nice.
It will be absolutely, and this is also what Toltecs say, is like war will be just like something so archaic, something that like nobody would even consider it anymore. It would be just the absolute folly. So that's huge. That's something that is coming. Um, it may take some uh, troubling, distressing experiences for us to get there because we might have to get shocked into it. But it's, what's
Yeah,
happening in Ukraine and what's
yeah,
happening in parts of the world are horrifying enough. I don't know
yeah,
what else it takes to wake us up, but whatever it takes. Okay. And if we're smart about it, we'll do it quickly. We'll
yeah,
get it. Like this is unacceptable. It doesn't go anywhere. It never solves anything. It only just creates through epigenetics trauma for the next 7 generations. It's the worst thing possible. Okay. So that we can look forward to. We can look forward to the equalizing and balancing of masculine and feminine. Finally, and whatever that might look like. There's probably aspects of it that we can't even imagine now that will come to pass. There will be great benefits of that. We all hope for that. We all want that, but we can't even imagine what that really means. What would it be like if men and women had a relationship where they honored each other, and it was cooperative and nobody had to manipulate the other to get things done or whatever. So there's that. There's also part of the prophecies are that we will wake up to our relationship with Mother Earth, that we will see that it's a vital relationship and that it requires communication and knowing who Mother Earth is, and that we can't just use her as an object to take and never give back. And we have to take care of our planet.
yeah,
And we're finding out very quickly now, but not quite enough yet.
yeah,
So there's some more processes there to realize that there's only one way,
yeah,
and that's to you know um, communicate in a good way and have Mother Earth teach us. That's what the indigenous people say. They say Mother Earth teaches us how to be with her, how to take care of her, and we haven't been. doing that. So there's another area. I mean, I could go on and on, but those are some examples of what's to
Yeah,
come and come quickly. You
yeah,
know, within within 3 generations, these things I'm talking about will all come to pass.
yeah. That's very fast considering where we're coming from.
Yeah.
I'm, I'm also wondering, you have, you're speaking from the Toltec worldview, and of course you have worked with and are familiar with other different kinds of indigenous worldviews and trainings, and also with how they engage with Mother Earth and her plants and um, methods of healing and illumination and so on. And one of the topics that has been more up front or sort of front of mind for people and perhaps front of heart for evermore is engagement with plant medicines in finding our way back, as well as when looked at from the sort of clinical development side, how to support the most those in the greatest need from the mental health perspective, and how to bring together, perhaps over time, perhaps we need to learn more, but there are pioneers figuring out what can be possible. And just sort of how do you think about it? How do the plant medicines help people find their way back and find the illumination, but also integrate it in the daily life? And what might be the obstacles in using this ancient shamanic process and everything we've learned from that? Like, where do you stand, and what would you like us to know?
Well, that's just a great question. It's huge. So let's try to break it down into, usable parts here. Um, First of all, like plant, I take more of an indigenous view of life that there's no accidents. Nothing is random. It's there's a purpose behind everything. So plants have their purpose, their medicines. But everything is medicine. The elements, the minerals, the plants, the animals. We are medicine, and medicines have a purpose. They're for this or they're for that. And some medicines are not for people, but they're for animals. Some plants
Hmm.
would poison us, but some animals eat them because it helps them. So not all medicines are good for all
Yeah.
possibility. So you have to learn what medicines are appropriate for what things. Long, long ago, through many processes of um, use of intuition and the ability that our forebears, ancestors had of talking to the plants, they discovered what those plants' medicines were and how they could help. And the medicines, the plants more or less said, we've been developing for millions of years to be of service to you. The, we have our medicines, and this is my medicine. And that plant over there, that's her medicine. And like that. So human beings became acquainted with the medicines of various plants and animals and so on, totems and allies and all that stuff. That's all shamanic stuff. And they began to experiment and use these plants, but very important point here, they asked the plants, how do we take you? How do we use you? And the plant said, well, you don't ever take me by itself. See that plant over there? You take that plant with me, and together we have our special medicine. You'll see. So they did that. They put the plants together and they took that and they went, wow, this is amazing, because some plants help your open your lungs, and some plants help to remove headaches and increase your blood pressure and lower it, and all these things physiologically. But some plants, their specialties are about, um, for want of a better term, uh, getting the ego out of the way so that a person can once again sense their connection with all the parts, you know, so they sense their oneness. Okay, so that's a grand medicine. Those are considered like you know, grandma's and grandpa medicines, right? And so these plants exist all over the planet, and they were discovered by indigenous people and worked with by their shamans and medicine people who work with
Yeah.
medicines, and they were they became able to heal people both physically and emotionally and psychologically, because people have always had mental problems, emotional problems. They've been traumatized, had to recover from traumas all throughout history. And they discovered that some plants could really help these people. But the plants also told them, this is my song. Sing my song, and I will reveal my abilities, my energies. So there's an education going on,
And
and
that's a literal song that
a
you're
literal
speaking of.
song.
Yeah.
Yeah, literal song. Like, and they're called Icaros by the South American medicine people. Icaro just means sacred song. And there's sacred songs all over this planet. But some of them are associated with particular plants. And then there was information about dosages. Take 3 of these leaves and take a bit of my stem and you know cook it up, and then take that syrup or whatever comes from that, or just take a speck of me, or take a whole cup of me over here. That's very important to know. It wasn't just that people experimented and found out, it was that the plants told them. So they, you know, otherwise they would have killed themselves over and over and over again, you know. So it didn't, you know, people, anthropologists often think, oh, people just learn sort of the hard way. No, there's always been helpers along the way. We've had help all along. So the plants have helped us. So this all comes down to that the indigenous peoples have carried this wisdom and this knowledge, and they were taught certain ceremonies. You know, a type of ceremony where, see if I can get rid of that sound there. This isn't affecting, can you hear me?
I'm not hearing a sound.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. So the ceremony was very important. Like the ceremony might have certain songs that are sung at the beginning and then the middle, and other songs sung at the end. Maybe certain rituals were done, different healing ceremonies, in other words, different prayers were said. They learned that this certain ceremony worked with this plant, but another ceremony worked with that plant because the plants taught them. So this is a lot of knowledge. Now, a lot of these elders that know these things have died off, and through our civilized way of life, a lot of the younger people haven't been interested in those kinds of things because they're more interested in having their own smartphone and, you know, all that stuff. So it's been a difficult time where this knowledge, you know, has been preserved by just a few people. Now, um, more and more people have discovered that yes, there are indigenous peoples that are carriers of this wisdom that's come from down for thousands and thousands of years, extremely valuable information. And then there have been um, the pharmaceutical industry and the corporations that go with that have thought like, well, we could synthesize this and we could make this available through our laboratories to many, many people. And then more recently, it was thought that there could be like some kind of like therapeutic processes where people could take these medicines and then have some kind of beneficial experience, maybe getting over their PTSD or what have you. Okay, so this is where things get complicated and there's a lot of confusion. So now I'll give an example. Uh, there's an ingredient in certain cactus plants called mescaline. And mescaline is the major ingredient in peyote, which is taken by Native Americans and a lot of indigenous people in Mexico. There's huge peyote fields in Mexico that are considered sacred, and they're cultivated and all of that, and some in southern Texas. Uh, Mescaline during the 60s, it could have been earlier than that, was synthesized. So somebody in a laboratory was able to extract the unique ingredient and turn it into like I don't know the process because I'm not a chemist.
Hmm.
They basically produced mescaline that you could take that was created in a laboratory and not in a plant. Well, it separates it from all the alkaloids and all the minerals and all the everything that's been developing for millions of years and isolates one aspect of it. And that aspect, and I, a long time ago when this became available, I took some synthesized mescaline and it was really strong. So it was really mind altering and had some benefits, because it was like expansive. But there was a quality about it that was kind of cold. This is hard to talk about, but it was, there was no spirit there. There was something was missing. And then I had the opportunity to also take the natural form of it through peyote and through wachuma, which grows in the Andes, which is a cactus. And very different experience, very different. Still very beneficial, still very expansive, but it had like a foundation. It had depth, and it felt like spirit was present. And I know this is very subjective, and I wish I could be more exacting about this, but it's really a subjective kind of thing. I've talked to other people, and they've said the very same thing. So uh, back in the day, in the 60s, I also took LSD because it was being made available at that time. And it was remarkable experience, but it had the same qualities of being kind of cold, kind of chemical, kind of laboratory like, but really amazing. And since then, I've taken plants that were equally hallucinogenic, like ayahuasca, for example. Very, very different experience. It's it's the plant form. It has all its alkaloids. It has all its minerals. It has the teacher in it. It has that thing that told the indigenous people long ago, this is my medicine. This is what I do. This is my song. This is my ceremony. Those things are absent with laboratory concoctions. So it doesn't mean that it's not useful in some way. It's still useful, but it's been, I hate to say it, but dumbed down.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then the idea of using it as a therapeutic tool, that's not a bad idea. That's a good idea. But when the when the approach is not with a ceremony, not with any songs that came
Yeah.
along with it, so much is lost. And it's amazing that people still get benefit. They do. The research shows that some people really get amazing benefits, but not what they could get.
Yeah. If May I ask a question? I'm super curious.
Yeah.
So if you were to design, let's say that psychedelic based medicines make it through clinical development, the Western way, and have shown the benefit and they're useful. And if you were to design as much as possible back into it, everything else that you describe, perhaps put the ceremony around it, or how, first of all, can it be done? Can you add at least something back? What would you do? How would you think about it? How would you relate to it? Because it's a particular kind of a, Western mental discipline to go through these processes. And that's already kind of pioneers, or depending on where you look from, others might see them as wild cowboys trying to do this, right? The more traditional folks
Hmm.
in their field.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that is not necessarily a way steeped deeply in, let's look at how human beings have gathered wisdom, how ceremonies impact us, maybe in some therapeutic therapy settings, but not in the medicine settings, the allopathic Western medicine settings. So if you were to do it, how would you do it, or how would you advise others to kind of start bringing in that which makes a difference that you're speaking of?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's not fully answered in my own mind. I'm working with that question. It's like, I very often come to that question and I think about how would I do it, and like that. So I can only talk about, what I've glimpsed so far. Um, so as much as possible, it would be helpful to use raw ingredients. And that could be done, I mean, it could be done in greenhouses. It could be done, in other words, there's bridges. It may not be this exactly the same as growing it in its home territory, because then it gets the minerals of that land and where it originated. But in our world, you can't have everything. So sometimes for practical reasons, you have to compromise. So you grow it in a greenhouse. Well, maybe that's not as efficient as creating, and again, I'm not a chemist, but as creating huge batches in a lab that could be done very quickly and therefore much more profitable. But so much is lost that way that, I would really like to see a more return to the biological, plant-based. It's a vehicle
Yeah,
to carry that medicine. Okay. Because then, and I know a lot of people don't believe in spirit, and that's okay. Not everybody has to. Um, but spirit is a very palpable experience that I have in my life. I can't imagine not having a relationship with spirit because I feel spirit within me. So I miss spirit when spirit isn't showing up in the plants. It's like, it's not the same as taking an aspirin.
yeah,
That can be helpful, but it's like, uh, it doesn't take you to the same places.
yeah,
Okay. So then there's the other aspect of like, well, so um, when it's given to somebody and, there's clinical ideas about how, how to do this in a place where you have like a, a private room with a couch and, it's very divorced from nature usually, but it's a safe space. And that's very important to have a safe space and to have somebody there to sort of monitor and be helpful if needed. That's very good. That's helpful, but it's not the same as a ceremony. So I'd like to see some introduction of ceremony. Now, okay, so in a real ceremony, there's a live singer and they know the songs and they sing them. And that makes a huge difference. Uh, but, as a second best, you could have recordings. and you could know when to play what. In other words, you'd have them recorded in a certain order that they're usually done in a ceremony, and you could begin to bridge, bring in the ceremonial aspect, bring in the music aspect, because the music, the songs of the plants bring out what the plants can do, bring out the medicine. That even happens in a recording.
Yeah.
So that's okay. So in other words, like there have to be some bridges. Now, not everybody can relate to indigenous songs and ceremony, but when they're on medicine, they do. So that's not a problem ultimately. It's like they go, wow, I never would have thought that that music would be so impactful. I would have just like, who wants to listen to that? And then all of a sudden it's like, that was amazing. So it's possible. But it reduces the convenience of the whole thing. So the corporate world is looking at convenience and profit, in addition to sometimes being of service, which is nice. But
Probably scale also, because only so few
scale,
people can go to the jungle,
yeah,
but
exactly. So
you
that
can
that's
you can
not
serve many
realistic.
more. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So there have to be some like compromises made, so that you can reach more people, but you can reach them in a way that really brings the best
yeah.
forward.
And looping back to the kind of the first question, which was the deepest, humans as luminous beings, people as self-illuminated, and then like in the Toltec way, as you described. Do you see as people move through their whatever they move through in those kinds of plant medicine like or light journeys, does that change anything about their level of luminosity or the ability to be illuminated? Are these the same or not the same? How do you think about it?
That's the natural next question. And, I'm really glad you asked that. Uh, so plant medicines, um, as part of their medicine, are designed by nature to wake us up to the light that's within us and allow it to shine forth. So, in other words, it's a stimulus. It's kind of like taking that ember and
Mhm.
putting some twigs on it and some dry leaves and getting a flame. That's what the plants do. But, important but here, the person has to be ready.
Mhm.
So, these medicines are not for everyone. I, I've discovered that over the years, just by experience. One time I had a woman who was an older woman, and she had been a child during the Holocaust. And she had lost her parents and her entire family in the Holocaust, but she survived and she was rescued. Um, and she wanted to try medicine. And so, you know, uh, I sat with her on this particular medicine. And I was really shocked because what came out of her was demonic. It was dark. And she started talking about how she wanted vengeance and she wanted to kill everybody that killed her family. It was awful. It was a nightmare. And it went on for hours. And I used all my skills. And I just couldn't move her off that. And it finally wore off. And she was sort of, grumpy. And that was that. It didn't
Yeah,
go where I thought it was going to go. It didn't go well. She wasn't ready.
yeah,
It was too much toxic, too much poison. and all it did was light the poison up
Yeah.
instead of her light up behind it. So, and I've learned from her and other people that the person has to be ready. You can't just drop, you know, I mean, in the 60s, it was thought that you could just drop LSD into the water supply and everybody would wake up. Terrible idea. Terrible idea, and because you don't know.
Mhm.
And so you have to screen people very carefully.
Yeah.
Now, that's a really important part of it. So, but if the person is ready, it can be spectacular lighting of the light. And it may be just temporary. It may be that they get a taste of what it's like to have this light flowing through them and radiating out, and they'll never forget it. And they'll know that it's possible. And that can change a person's life. And sometimes it wakes it up to the point where that becomes their experience of life. And it's kind of like a enlightening experience. And when that happens, it's really joyful. And through plants, I think it's much more possible than through things like sitting in meditation for 25 years, facing the wall. Eventually that'll have an impact too, but I don't think that's very efficient. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. There is so much to think about and so much to take in and so much to consider and stay open to. So thank you. Thank you really so much. And thank you also for your free gifts that you and your organization have made available, a free subscription to the Power Path School of Shamanism YouTube channel with a
oh
lot of good stuff there.
yeah.
And your library of articles, I have really enjoyed reading your articles, and there will be links, of course, under the interview page on for that. But it is such a treat and such an honor to have you with your experience, with your courage, with your ability to articulate and integrate across these different ways of understanding the world in a way that can land in a wide diversity of the audience, wherever they come from, and also the nuggets of wisdom. So I very much look forward to hopefully staying in touch and seeing if we can bring you in some other form another time, and
That would be wonderful.
perhaps a panel discussion or something like that to continue.
Well, I just want to say that it really helps to have uh, an interviewer like you, who is familiar with the territory, because it's just so much easier for me. I've been interviewed by people that had no
Yeah,
no background, no knowledge of this at all. And it's rough.
yeah. I'm gonna stop the recording, but I'm not gonna leave the Zoom, so I'll just do that. But
Okay.
yeah.